Call John now at 877-970-2999.
She's just like you and me, but she's homeless. She's homeless. As she stands there singing for money. La, la, dee, la, dee, la.
1140, this is Frank Morano on AM 970. The Answer. You remember about a year ago, 2 years ago, all of a sudden, nobody was talking about homelessness. Nobody seemed to care about homelessness. And then all of a sudden, we woke up one day, and it seemed almost as if overnight that the homeless people just magically sprang up all over the city. And you saw an enormous effort on the part of Bill de Blasio to say our administration really is doing a lot on homelessness. You saw a big effort on the part of Andrew Cuomo to say, well, don't blame us. The state is still doing plenty on homelessness. And then you saw Rudy Giuliani even talk about all the success he had in battling homelessness.
Mayor de Blasio is claiming that there were more homeless during your time.
Okay. Here is how ignorant Mayor de Blasio is.
Wow.
He said that there were 40% more homeless people during my administration.
Right.
The Times corrected it and said 32%. But you know what the 32% is? There were 32% more people in shelters. People who are in shelters, I would like to inform the mayor, are not homeless. Of course there were more people in shelters because Mike Bloomberg and I got them off the streets.
So you had Mike Bloomberg, Rudy Giuliani, David Dinkins, and Bill de Blasio all rushing to take credit for their success with homelessness. Now, my question, of course, is how can you have every single living mayor take credit for essentially solving the homelessness problem when there's homeless all over the place? So what I want to do, beyond the realm of politics and actually getting to hopefully a solutions-based point of view, is find out what the homeless situation is like. Is this going to be something New York City has to deal with in perpetuity? How do people end up homeless? Is it really only the mentally deranged and the drug addicted that we pass on our way to work and, pretend that we don't hear as they ask for change? Or are the homeless really just like you and me? So we have two experts that I have invited in studio this morning. We have Jeff Foreman, who is the policy director of the nonprofit Care for the Homeless. Jeff, good morning. Thanks for coming in. Good morning. And we have Philip Malebranche, who I'm excited to introduce you to as well. Philip is college educated. Philip is a very talented writer. And Philip has been homeless himself. That's right, Phil, right?
That's right.
You mind if I call you Phil? That's okay?
Philip, please.
Philip, please. Got it. Okay. Now, Philip, let me begin with you because you have such a fascinating story. And then we'll get into what Jeff's group does and how maybe they helped you and how they can help others. How did you end up? Where are you from originally? How did you end up homeless?
I was born in Queens and grew up in Rockland County, New York.
And what happened in your life that caused you to be without a roof over your head?
I've experienced a series of unlawful evictions. I don't have a drug history. I don't have a psychiatric disability, but I've come up against unlawful evictions more than once, and that has been the bane of my situation.
So your landlord on more than one occasion evicts you.
That's right.
And then you end up on the street.
That's right.
And then did you seek out help from a homeless shelter?
Every person has a different story. I prefer not to be on the street, so I went to shelter. And so I spent most of the time of my experience with homelessness in shelter.
Okay. And then tell me how you now, what's your status now, just so our listeners understand?
Last month, I moved out of shelter through the Business Link program, which is a city agency program that's run by HRA, Human Resources Administration. Mm-hmm. I found a room. So I'm housed now for the first time in a number of years, and I have a room in Queens.
Wow. So first of all, we're very pleased to hear that. As someone who's been kind of on the front line of understanding what a lot of us is kind of an abstract issue, tell me your perception of whether the homelessness problem has improved, worsened, or stayed about the same over the last few years.
The problem is tied to policy. There was a few years ago, I think, during the Bloomberg administration, rental assistance that was available for persons experiencing homelessness, and that was decreased or removed altogether, And that is, in the eyes of many advocates, the reason why the number of homelessness, the number of people experiencing homelessness in the city expanded suddenly, seemingly.
And I want to bring in Jeff here. Jeff Foreman, he's the policy director of Care for the Homeless. He's been in that position for the last few years. Jeff, first of all, how did you get involved in tackling the homelessness issue?
Well, I wanted to. My background is not in nonprofit work, but I had reached the point in my life where I wanted to be involved in some nonprofit mission, and so I got to Care for the Homeless. I worked for them as a volunteer, as a consultant, and then 4 years ago became their policy director.
And then what does Care for the Homeless actually do?
Care for the Homeless is the oldest and largest provider of health care services, medical and mental health care services, to people experiencing homelessness, exclusively to people experiencing homelessness in New York City. So they've been doing this since about 1985. They currently run 29 federally qualified and state licensed health clinics exclusively for homeless people in 4 of the 5 boroughs, all but Staten Island.
Is the money that funds CFH private donations? Is it government grants? Is it some combination? How is your group funded?
It is a combination. We have a federal grant for people who have no insurance coverage and no ability to pay that we can access, and most of our clients all of our clients don't have the ability to pay market rates. Most of them wouldn't have the ability without coverage to pay at all. We also raise funds to augment what government contracts we have.
Do you share Philip's view that the increase in the number of streeted homeless was a result of policy, number one, and is it a result of that same policy change regarding rental subsidies that Philip cited?
Absolutely. I agree with him that it is a policy matter. At Care for the Homeless, one of the things we believe strongly is that poor public policy created modern-day homelessness, the crisis, and better policies could end homelessness. And one of those poor policies is exactly the one that Philip spoke about. During the Bloomberg administration, at one point they increased subsidies and people were taking advantage of it, and then they felt that perhaps people were coming into shelter because there would be the availability of rental subsidies, and they would have fewer people in shelter if they cut it off. They cut it off. The number of people in shelter exploded, and the number of people on the street increased too.
Now, I remember reading around, September of 2015, there was a lot of blame going on that the city was actually blaming the state for the discontinuation of this program. Is that accurate? That happened, and does the state bear some responsibility as well? Was this the Work Advantage program?
It was the Advantage program.
And did the state play a role, in fact, in reducing funding to the city for the Work Advantage program?
They did. They not only did the state funding for it, and the state and the city approximately split the cost of the program. Not only did the state cut off the funding, but they actually put statutory language in the budget that prohibited them for funding such a program. Took years to get that language out so that they now again contribute. But the city bears a responsibility there too. They didn't want to continue with the program because lots of people were criticizing it. Lots of advocates were criticizing it because of certain ways that it was being administered. No advocate wanted there to be no program.
I want to get both of your recommendations in terms of what we can do to straighten out the policy to improve homelessness. But Robert Doar, who was the commissioner of the New York City Human Resources Administration from 2007 to 2013, the HRA is the group that you cited earlier, Philip, he pointed out that in February of 2011, Governor Cuomo issued a proposed budget which ended Albany's share of funding for this Advantage program. And he says, Robert Doar says, that the Bloomberg administration and several homeless advocates all warned this is going to lead to an increase in the number of streeted homeless. Why didn't the governor listen?
Well, there was, at that time, there was a lot of feeling expressed by the Bloomberg administration that this program was perhaps drawing people into shelter. So I think both sides bear some real responsibility here. It was a real policy mistake that the state cut off funding. I would note that the program was big enough that the city could have continued to fund at a smaller scale on their own if they wanted to, and they didn't. So they weren't to scale.
So plenty of blame to go around.
Plenty of blame.
Philip, based on you seem like you've studied this pretty closely, and you seem obviously as somebody that's firsthand been affected by this. What would you suggest as a ways that we can change public policy to reduce the number of homeless on the streets right now?
Homelessness is tied to several phenomena. Rental assistance is very important to stabilize the living situations of people experiencing homelessness. But homelessness is also tied to the housing market, the real estate market, the real estate magnates' intentions with the market. A lot of building is going up for wealthy people, and low-income housing, and I'm talking about housing for very low-income people, is not being built. And that only exacerbates the problem of homelessness in the city. Until the real estate industry and other leaders in the city decide to construct more housing for low-income people, the situation will not change.
Jeff, let me ask you a twofold question, and we'll end it on this note. And I want to. By the way, what's the best way for people to learn more about your group, CFH?
Well, they can go to our website, which is www.cfhnyc.org, and they can contact us that way.
cfhnyc.org. Two-part question here. One, if we go the route that Philip suggests and, have more affordable housing, where I live in Staten Island, I can tell you that, to put affordable housing in many of the neighborhoods, particularly in the South Shore, would be about as popular as dropping a bomb in the neighborhood. So how do you overcome the desire of the residents not to have this sort of housing in their neighborhood, while at the same time serving residents that need it? That's the first question. And number two, is homelessness going to be with us forever, or realistically, is it a problem that we can address to a statistically significant level?
Well, I'm anxious to answer that second question first.
Yeah.
Homelessness, we don't have to have the kind of homelessness we have today. We could start ending that right now. We could end it in a matter of years, not decades, and we could do it for not much more money, or perhaps not more money than we're spending right now to not end homelessness. We're very confident that you can end homelessness. Before the late 1970s, we didn't have a crisis like this, not in New York and not across the country. There were certainly homeless people, but it was nothing like this. And that's the time when policy changed, mostly federal policy. They were spending over $77 million a year on real affordable housing. In 1 year, it was cut from that to $17 million. It has never gotten back up to that same figure. If we'd been spending that same amount all along, we wouldn't have this problem today. So there are policy ways of ending this. You're certainly right about what you said.
You know what? Hold your answer to my first part of the question. We have to take a break, and when we come back, I'm going to give you guys the last word, and we're going to get the answer to your question. Talking homelessness, this is the John Gambling Show. I'm Frank Morano.
Call John now at 877-970-2999.
Just a couple of minutes before 12, in our last moment of the hour here, I want to finish up with Jeff Foreman and Philip Malebranche, who are experts in the problem of New York City homelessness. And Jeff, you were saying about how do you handle a situation where we need affordable housing, but many neighborhoods simply don't want it in their backyard? How do you balance the two needs?
Well, of course, if everyone argues not in my backyard, that means nowhere, and we need this housing. The last day of the Bloomberg administration, the Independent City Budget Office issued a report that said that for every household of supportive housing in New York City for homeless people, that the city saved $10,100.
Wow.
It's a lot of money. And when we're spending over $1 billion a year on homeless shelters, it's actually cheaper to have wraparound support services that people need. And that could solve the biggest part of our problem.
Philip and Jeff, I want to thank you both for coming up here. Unfortunately, this is a situation we're going to be talking about quite a bit for quite some time, and we're going to rely upon you again.
Thanks, Frank.
Thank you.
All right. Next hour, we'll take your calls at 877-970-2999. You have thoughts on homelessness? You have thoughts on last night's Democratic convention? 877-970-2999. This is Frank Morano on AM 970, The Answer.